The Falcons made the most boring hire they could by naming Jeff Ulbrich their new defensive coordinator.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, guys, if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And to become an everyday, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are talking all about the Falcons' decision to hire Jeff Ulbrich as their new defensive coordinator, the most boring hire they could possibly make. We'll have the X's and O's conversation about Jeff Ulbrich, right, which is based on that hire. And then we'll also have the Jimmy's and Joe's conversation, which will be the bulk of today's episode, because regardless of who the Falcons were going to hire, this is the most important conversation that we're going to have this offseason, but we'll explain why later in the episode. But let's start off talking about Jeff Ulbrich. Who is Jeff Ulbrich, right? Most recently, he was the interim head coach for the New York Jets, as well as their defensive coordinator. They fired Robert Saleh, their former head coach, after 5 games this past year. Ulbrich took over for the final 12. The Jets went 3-9 during that stretch. They had one of the NFL's worst defenses during that stretch. More on that in a bit. While Ulbrich maintained play calling duties on defense, right? Those play calling duties that he had since being hired by Robert Saleh to be the defensive coordinator back in 2021 with the New York Jets. And prior to his stint in New York, Ulbrich was the defensive coordinator for the Falcons in 2020, while Raheem Morris was the interim head coach after Dan Quinn's firing that year. He had limited play calling responsibilities in 2019 and 2020 under both Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris in those years. Most of his prior work prior to 2019 came exclusively as the Falcons linebackers coach from 2015 to 2019. And prior to that, he was also a defensive coordinator at UCLA for 1 season, as well as the linebackers coach there, where he coached, guys like Miles Jack and Eric Kendricks. So what we know about Jeff Ulbrich is that he's a capable, I won't say good, for my own personal reasons that I'm sure we'll get into in the coming days and weeks on this podcast, but a capable linebacker coach. He called some successful defenses in New York, particularly in 2022 and 2023, where the Jets had one of the best defense, or had 2 of the best defenses in the NFL those seasons. And then in 2021 and 2024, not so good defenses that were somewhere among the worst defenses in the NFL under Jeff Ulbrich. And so the question is, why is this such a boring hire? Well, we don't really know what a Jeff Ulbrich defense looks like, right? Is a Jeff Ulbrich defense a Robert Saleh defense? Is it a Raheem Morris defense? Is it a Dan Quinn defense? We really don't know. All of Ulbrich's success as a play caller has come running a Robert Saleh defense, and the hallmarks of a Robert Saleh defense that he had in both New York as well as San Francisco when he was DC there for 4 years prior to becoming the head coach of the New York Jets was, he's going to rush 4, right? He's going to play some very basic coverages on the back end, a lot of man coverage, a healthy amount of quarters coverage as their sort of preferred zone coverage. No real disguise, no real complexity when it comes to their coverages. We're just going to rely on our front 4 guys to kick butt. And in the years in San Francisco and New York, when those guys kicked butt, the defense played well. When the years where the defensive front did not kick butt, getting pressure with 4, stopping the run effectively, the defense did not play particularly well. And so I don't think that means that Robert Saleh deserves all the credit for the success of the Jets defense in recent memory, due to the dramatic drop-off that they had in 2024 after his firing. I don't think that's fair that Ulbrich doesn't get any credit for that, right? Ulbrich did admit that this past year, when he tried to pull double duty as an interim head coach and a defensive coordinator, that it stretched them too thin, and both the team and defense suffered. And it's worth noting that how the defense suffered during that stretch. In the final 12 games of the 2024 season, according to advanced metrics like expected points added or EPA per play, the Jets finished 30th in those final 12 games. In DVOA, the Jets finished 25th during that 12-game span under Ulbrich, or exclusively under Ulbrich. And so, because of those struggles, I think a lot of people are going to attribute most, if not all, of the Jets' previous success to Robert Saleh rather than Jeff Ulbrich. I don't think that's particularly fair to Jeff Ulbrich. He did call those defenses, even if the defensive philosophy you wouldn't say was a Jeff Ulbrich defense. It was more a Robert Saleh defense. But at the same time, I'm not going to also use those successful seasons as some indicator that he can repeat that success in Atlanta, because I don't necessarily see the Falcons building a dominant defense front. I would like to, right? I daydream about it all the time, but I don't think that's a realistic goal, especially in one offseason, right? We'll talk about what's more realistic in one offseason later in the episode. But, essentially, Ulbrich was executing somebody else's vision. And I think ultimately that's probably why he was hired here in Atlanta. Ulbrich and Raheem had a very close relationship during their working time in Atlanta under Dan Quinn. They had a semi-successful working relationship in 2019 and 2020. Those were decent defenses. I think they finished like 18th and 19th in DVOA, respectively, in 2019 and 2020. When they were working together as play callers and game planners for the Falcons. I suspect the reasoning behind this hire is Raheem knows that Jeff Ulbrich is going to better execute the vision of his defense than what Jimmy Lake was able to do in 2024, right? But I think it's going to be fairly criticized, this hire, that is, because I don't think Raheem Morris is really learning the correct lessons from the Falcons' 2024 struggles, right? To me, the correct lesson would be, that 2024 defense was fundamentally flawed in several elements of their defense, and bringing a fresh, new, and different perspective from a new defensive coordinator would have probably the Falcons, and had the Falcons hired any other four defensive coordinators that had experience as play callers in the NFL, Steve Wilks, Lou Anarumo, Wink Martindale, Matt Eberflus, you would have been able to tell yourself that, oh, we're getting a fresh, new perspective. Instead, I think Raheem seems to have learned that, well, it was just my wrong buddy, right? Jimmy Lake was my buddy, Jeff Ulbrich's my buddy, and I just need to get the right buddy to call this right defense. And so that's why, to me, it is a boring move, right? The Falcons interviewed 7 guys, 5 of whom had previous play calling experience: Ulbrich, Wilks, Anarumo, Martindale, and Eberflus. And if they had picked any of those other 4, we could have actually spent some time on today's episode talking about the various X's and O's and differences in the scheme that any of the other 4 would bring to the table that Jeff Ulbrich is going to bring, because all 4 of those other guys had a different philosophy, had an identity to their defense. And the Falcons decided to choose the one guy out of the 5 that didn't really have that. And so I guess we're going to find out in 2025, even though Jeff Ulbrich has been calling defensive plays for 5 years, what a Jeff Ulbrich defense looks like. So, what is a Jeff Ulbrich defense? No idea. Just like we couldn't look last year and say, what's a Jimmy Lake defense? No idea. So again, I think the assumption is going to be that the Falcons are going to continue to run a Raheem Morris defense, because that is more definitive. And we'll get some tweaks from Jeff Ulbrich. What those tweaks are going to be, well, I guess we'll spend the next 7 months to speculate about it. But, part of the reason why I find this boring, because, I have to sit here and spend those 7 months giving you guys daily content, and I don't know what to give you. And so we can have some guests come on and talk about the Robert Saleh defense. We might even be able to find a guest or 2 that can come on and tell us what's the difference between what the Jets defense was doing in those final 12 weeks to what they were doing in the previous, 3.3 years where Robert Saleh was, part of the thing. But outside of that, how much of that is going to be applicable here in Atlanta, I have no idea. So to me, this is kind of like the Marcus Mariota of defensive coordinator hires that the Falcons made. And that's a reference to back in 2022 when the Falcons traded Matt Ryan and they signed Marcus Mariota the same day. And I came on the podcast and said, yeah, we didn't spend any of that episode talking about Marcus Mariota. And I basically told people, we're not going to spend that much time talking about Marcus Mariota as a starting quarterback. It's going to be an uncharacteristically low amount of time talking about the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons for the next, 4+ months here on Locked On Falcons, because we know at that time, the minute they signed Marcus Mariota, he's a bridge quarterback. That really the future of the Falcons quarterback position is going to be whoever they wind up drafting in April. That wind up being Desmond Ridder. And so that was what we spent a lot of time in the summer talking about, much more than we did talking about Mariota. Right. And so this is kind of the same situation with the Jeff Ulbrich. It's like, there's really not a whole lot to talk about, because again, there's no such thing as a Jeff Ulbrich defense, at least anything that we can discern. And again, maybe we'll be able to find something out. I don't know. But we're not going to spend that much energy talking about it because it doesn't really exist. So, as I said, this is boring. It's a nothing burger of a hire. So whoop-de-doo. Congratulations, Raheem. You got your buddy back in the building. You swapped out one buddy for another. And again, like I say all this stuff not because I think the Falcons defense is doomed to be terrible again. I don't know what the Falcons defense is going to be because I think ultimately what the Falcons defense is going to be dependent on not who the new defensive coordinator is, but the roster moves that the Falcons wind up making this offseason, right? I think there's definitely a path for the Falcons to have significant improvements on defense under Jeff Ulbrich this year. But that path requires them to upgrade the roster, right? Not necessarily the play calling. And that's going to get us into a conversation on, regardless of who the new defensive coordinator is, the real key to upgrading that defense, as I said, is depending on roster moves, not coordinator moves. So we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, growing your small business in 2025 is going to come down to how well you hire, right? And with LinkedIn, right, you're not going to make boring hires on LinkedIn because they're going to make you have better hires with smarter insights, interesting hires, because LinkedIn's going to help you identify the right candidates and give you the confidence that you're making the best decisions for your business because it's a game changer when trying to find the right fit. LinkedIn's going to connect you with the best candidates using data, right, that you're not going to find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests and connections that you share, LinkedIn's going to help you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And it is playoff time. And so you're trying to get the most out of these final weeks of football that we have. And Prize Picks is going to help you because you're going to get a chance to win real money while you're watching the games. It's the place for you and the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. Prize Picks, all you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform because it's easy, right? I put my Prize Picks in, just 2, right? Basically, more Jahmyr Gibbs, 0.5 touchdowns, more Derrick Henry, 0.5 touchdowns. So I just need a touchdown from Jahmyr Gibbs. I got that. Waiting on you, Derrick Henry. Sunday Night Football hasn't been played yet as I'm saying this, but that's how easy it is to win money on Prize Picks. And you can do so too by downloading the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. And you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So the question over the last couple of weeks since the end of the season has been, when it comes to the X's and O's, that was going to be heavily dependent on who the Falcons hired as the defensive coordinator. But as we saw, the Falcons were like, nah, we're good. We're not going to make any interesting choices when it comes to that, so you can suck it, Aaron. Your daily podcast is not going to be very good for these next couple of weeks. We're not even going to talk about it on the podcast. Thank you. I could have got a whole week of this content. Shout out to you, Raheem, for ruining this podcast. But no, we knew that we were going to have an Jimmy's and Joe's conversation, right? And that was going to be the same conversation regardless of who the Falcons hired as defense coordinator. Because if you've listened to this podcast for any significant amount of time, you've heard me say that on defense, it's more about the Jimmys and Joes than it is the X's and O's. It's the opposite on offense. It's why I give Zach Robinson, the Falcons offensive coordinator, a much harder time than a lot of you guys think I should. But the reason for that belief is there is no perfect play call on defense, right? Defense is really about reacting to what the offense is doing, and that's always going to put you at a disadvantage schematically. Right. And the simple analogy I use is it's like sieging a castle, right? The defense are the defenders on the inside of the castle trying to keep the attackers out. The offense are the attackers on the outside of the castle trying to get in. Right. And the offense, has many choices. They can attack the front gate, the back gate, the side gate. They don't even have to attack any of the gates. Right. They can go over the walls, under the walls, through the walls. Right. And the defense has to guard against all of those outcomes and react to whatever the offense and the attackers wind up deciding. And so the offense, often will make you think they're going to attack the front gate, and then they misdirect you, right? And attack the side gate or the back gate or whatever, right? That's misdirection. The equivalent of that on offense is, play action passing, which is, we know Zach Robinson missed that part of history class. where they explain, the value of misdirection when it comes to that. And it's like, Aaron, really, you're going to take shots at Zach Robinson on a Jeff Ulbrich episode? You're gosh darn right I am. Some, folks in the Locked On Falcons Discord had the audacity to question, if I'm being too critical of Zach Robinson. And anybody who knows me knows that that's a challenge, right? A challenge accepted. I'm going to double down on my criticism of Zach Robinson. So you're going to hear a lot more Zach Robinson criticism in the coming days and weeks, especially now that we're going to start our positional breakdown. So we get a lot of opportunities to take some shots, baby. But getting back to the subject at hand, the defense, right? So basically, when it comes to the defense, you need to have the best possible players on defense so that you can react more quickly and effectively when you figure out whatever the offense is doing. And so the simple thing is the Falcons, in order to improve their defense, need to get better players, and they need to get better at all three levels. And, that's defensive line, linebacker, and secondary. And I think there are 5, sort of check boxes that you want to check this offseason in terms of goals to achieve in order to improve this defense, right? Ideally, again, this is more ideally, not necessarily realistic, but number 1, you want to add a double-digit sack artist at edge rusher, right? Number 2, you want to beef up the interior D-line, mainly with, getting a new nose tackle in the building, getting another wide body up front, right? Number 3, you want to get more athletic at linebacker. Number 4, you want to upgrade the cornerback spot, and that may mean upgrading 2 out of those 3 cornerback spots, outside corner opposite A.J. Terrell and nickel cornerback. And then number 5, you want to upgrade that safety spot opposite Jesse Bates. Now, the question, of course, is going to be, will the Falcons accomplish all 5 of these goals? We'll see, right? Check back in the podcast in 5 months, right? And we'll find out. But the hope is that 5 months from now, when the offseason is over, we'll be able to say at least the Falcons tried. They attempted to upgrade all 5 boxes. And no, attempting is not saying that, hey, we would have signed Danielle Hunter, but we didn't, right? You actually have to go out and sign somebody. You can't just say you tried to sign somebody. That's not what we call trying in the NFL. And we can sit there 5 months from now and say, we feel pretty confident, optimistic that they were able to achieve at least check 4 of those 5 boxes. I think the hardest one that this team is going to be hardest for them to check is finding that double-digit sack guy, just because those guys don't grow on trees. But the other 4 spots to me are realistic expectations that they can upgrade, right? And I do think they should be able to upgrade the edge. It's just a question of whether they get that double-digit sack guy is really what I'm talking about. So, they have limited resources, only 5 draft picks, limited cap space. So it's going to be tough for them to pull this off. But, that's why it's so important that Terry and them go out there and have an important offseason, maybe the most important offseason of his entire tenure. Right? All this talk of Terry being a terrible GM or a great GM up to this point, to me, is just talk. Right? We'll find out. You'll get to walk the walk this offseason. And, that's why I'm not sitting here going like, we should have fired Terry Fontenot, because I'm like, I don't want to hamstring another coach and another GM and basically say, well, we're going to have to punt on this offseason because Terry set you up to fail. And I'm like, Terry, you dug your own grave, dig yourself out of it. And if you do, great, you get to keep your job. If you don't, well, we'll move it on. But, this is kind of underlying the point when we look at Jeff Ulbrich's history, because the Jets under Jeff Ulbrich made a massive improvement on defense going from 2021 to 2022 when Jeff Ulbrich was there, right? They were 32nd in DVOA in 2021 and 32nd in EPA in 2021. And then in 2022, they were 6th in DVOA and 4th in EPA. So essentially went from the worst defense to a top 5 defense the following year. And how did they do that? Well, they went out and upgraded their roster. What? What a crazy concept. So we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel is going to make the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep this playoff action going. And FanDuel, their app is easy to navigate. You're going to be able to, check out a variety of bets and make every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, so you don't have to wait around for your winnings. And whether you're betting on your favorite team or you're riding the Jaden Daniels bandwagon or getting frustrated because you're not riding the Jaden Daniels bandwagon at this point in time, FanDuel is the place for you. They got you covered, right? And, my parlays aren't hitting all because of Jaden Daniels. So shout out to you, Jaden Daniels. You are ruining my life. But if you want Jaden Daniels to not ruin your life or whatever you want to do, it's all up to you guys. That's the beauty of FanDuel. You can do whatever you want. Bet on football, bet on basketball, bet on hockey, bet on Jai-alai, whatever that sport is called. I don't know. FanDuel has it all. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and start with $200. And you'll get started with $300. $300, even better starting price. $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet over at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable. Unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So you've heard me say in the past that the Falcons basically ran it back with like 75% of the same roster from 2023. And therefore you shouldn't be that surprised that the Falcons got very similar results from 2024 as they had in 2023. And basically Raheem Morris and company made the big bet this past offseason that, Terry Fontenot and them had done 75% of the legwork of building a playoff caliber team. And they just need to go out there and get the 25% difference to get them over the hump from a roster standpoint. And also, we were going to get a significant upgrade in coaching, which we did not really get. But, hey, next time, we'll get them next time, right? And, when I say they retain 75% of the roster, that comes from looking at the top 16 players in terms of snap counts on both offense and defense, right? There were 4 new faces on either side of the ball. It's 25%, right? But thanks to a late season surge by Michael Penix, they had 5 new players on their top 16 on offense. So, if you expand past 16, you look at the top 20, it would still be 6 players. So it's about 70%, of the same players on offense for this team from 23 to 24, right? And those, 6 new faces were Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod, Michael Penix, Charlie Warner, and Ross Dwelly. So basically new quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends, right? And on defense, they still only had 4 of the top 16, 5 of the top 20 were new faces. So again, 75%. And those 5 guys were Justin Simmons, Matthew Judon, Eddie Goldman, James Smith-Williams, and the incomparable Damon Harris. Now, when you look at the Jets defense from 21 to 22, they had 9 of 16 new players with 2 asterisks, 11 of 20. So instead of the 75% retention rate that the Falcons had on defense this past year, the Jets had only about 45% retention rate from 21 to 22. So over half of their defensive roster turned over the following offseason after the 2021 season when they were the worst defense in the NFL. Now, I mentioned 2 asterisks. So 2 of those new players that played in 2022 that weren't there in 2021 were players that were on that 2021 roster but missed the season with injury. That was Carl Lawson, who missed the entire 2021 season with a torn Achilles, and LaMarcus Joyner, who missed most of the season, played 9 snaps in week 1 before tearing his triceps. So those 2 guys were free agent signings in 2021, missed the season, and then were providing, value in 2022. And so that was a big part of why that defense was able to make significant improvements, right? That, they went out, and even if you didn't want to count those guys as adding new players, they still went out and added basically 9 new players on their defense from the 2022 offseason ahead of that season. They signed DJ Reed in free agency, Jordan Whitehead, the safety. They signed pass rushers like Solomon Thomas, Vinny Curry, and Jacob Martin in free agency. They picked up Quan Alexander, the linebacker, at the start of training camp. They drafted Sauce Gardner. They drafted Jermaine Johnson. They drafted Michael Clements, the latter 2 pass rushers. Right. And none of those free agent signings required a huge amount of spending. Right. DJ Reed got about $11 million a year. Jordan Whitehead got about $7 million a year. Jacob Martin got about $4.5 million a year. And the rest of those guys were basically veteran minimum guys. And so they didn't really go on this massive spending spree. Right. They weren't even targeting like elite free agents. Like DJ Reed was like number 40 on PFF's free agent rankings. Whitehead was 62. Jacob Martin was 168. And those 3 contracts combined for about $23.5 million in guaranteed money. We gave David Onyemata $24.5 million in guaranteed money back in 2023. Between him, Caden Ellis, Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree, Mike Hughes, the Falcons' big free agent signings that offseason, they spent over $47 million in guaranteed in that 2023 offseason. So basically twice as much as what the Jets spent the previous offseason to upgrade their defense, right? It's like, the Falcons defense also improved from 22 to 23 by spending in free agency. And the Jets defense also improved from 21 to 22 by spending in free agency and also drafting players. It's like, it's almost as if like the key to improving your defense is by adding good players to your defense. It's like, what an incredible concept. I've never heard of this. So we'll see what the Falcons do to add better players to their defense in 2025. Now, I think we're expecting significant improvement and contributions from their 2024 rookie class that did not really contribute on defense. Ruger Roro, Braylon Trice, Brandon Dorlus, JD Bertrand, I think are expected to make year 2 jumps. We'll see what year 3 and year 4 jumps from, players from the 2022 and 2023 draft classes like Arnold Ebiketie, Troy Anderson, Clark Phillips, Zach Harrison, DeMarco Hellams, etc. D'Angelo Malone, don't want to leave him out there. But I also think the Falcons should try to add other players to the roster and good players to the roster, right? Again, I don't need the Falcons to go out there and be the biggest spenders this offseason, right? Although I would love to be able to talk about these things on the podcast, don't get me wrong, but I don't need them to go out there and go pay Javon Holland at safety or DJ Reed at corner or Nick Bolton at linebacker or Josh Sweat at edge rusher. Those guys are expected to be among the highest paid free agents this offseason at their respective positions. I would love to see it again, but I don't need it. But I need them to do something, right? And I'm not expecting us to get, 55% turnover like the Jets did in the 2022 offseason. I'm expecting something closer to 25 to 30%. I'm expecting 5 or 6 new faces on this defense, but I'm hoping that they can maximize that 25 to 30% more than they did last year, right? Where arguably the biggest contributor of those 5 guys that the Falcons added was Eddie Goldman. It wasn't Justin Simmons. It wasn't Matthew Judon. Certainly wasn't James Smith-Williams. And so I need to get more out of this next crop of players that are going to come in. And so if we do, I think we'll see improvement for the Falcons defense. And so maybe this very boring DC hire will look a lot less boring on the football field, right? Because the Falcons will be anything but boring this offseason come March, come April, when it comes time to improving their roster. So that's what my hope is. We'll see if the Falcons do it. But until then, I guess we'll talk about what could happen, right? We'll sit here and I'll do the thing that I've done so many times in the Terry Fontenot era, which is, get my mouth all ready for some hash, thinking, oh man, the Falcons are going to go out and they're going to sign this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy in free agency. And then they do nothing. Right? The one time they did it was 2023. And then guess what, guys? Do you guys remember that 2023 offseason? You everydayers that were back checking us out back then? Remember how optimistic and positive I was? You guys think that's a coincidence? You think it was just, I was just happy that, because I just had so much faith in Desmond Ridder, right? You guys think like, oh, he's just a Desmond Ridder fanboy. He's just a Kirk Cousins fanboy and he hates Michael Penix. Like, no, guys, it has nothing to do with the quarterback. It has everything to do with whether or not this team is going to actually sit here and be complacent. So, to me, this hire of Jeff Ulbrich is not them getting off to the best of starts. But again, it's step 1. You can wow me with steps 2, 3, 4, 5, which is actually going out there and improving the roster by, trying to check those 5 boxes that I outlined earlier, which is, pretty much upgrading across this entire defense: edge rusher, nose tackle, linebacker, corner, and safety. Bring them to me, Terry. Let me talk about them on the podcast, please. I want this. I need this. Help me help you. There was nothing I would like more, Terry, than to come on this podcast on March 17th or whenever it is, right? And instead of talking about the Falcons cutting Kirk Cousins, talking about, oh man, did you see this signing? Did you see that signing? Help me help you, Terry. Please. I would love to be a shill for this organization. Please cut me a check. But I would love to be by you actually going out there and doing something. Okay? Raheem's not helping you out by hiring Jeff Ulbrich. So Terry, it's just you and me. I'm just talking to you. Just you and me. Because they ain't doing nothing. So Terry, come on. Help me help you, please. Okay. So that's it for today, guys. We will be back tomorrow with more of whatever. We'll see what D-line hiring coach the Falcons wind up making in the coming days and weeks. But my plan is to start the positional breakdowns, probably starting with the quarterback position, and we'll run that through the week. Next week, we'll be down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Looking forward to that. We'll be doing draft coverage. Then we'll come back in February and talk positional breakdowns of the defense. So, we're going to do a lot of internal looking these next couple of weeks on the podcast, as well as looking ahead to the future with the draft in mind. And then after that, we'll turn our attention to free agency and the combine and all that stuff. So a lot of great stuff heading your way here on this illustrious podcast. Please continue to be an everydayer, making us your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out the Locked On NFL podcast to get the scoop on everything that's going on elsewhere in the NFL, head coaching hires, defensive coordinator hires, playoff games, all that and more. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Terry, help me help you. Please, Terry, please.